The invitation came on a Wednesday morning, delivered by hand to Naomi Carter's office on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta that she owned. Not leased, owned. This was a detail that approximately 12 people in Atlanta knew, because Naomi Carter had spent 3 years being very deliberate about what she made visible and what she kept quiet, and the ownership of commercial property was in the quiet category. The building's registered entity was a holding company with a name that said nothing about its owner, and the name on the door of the 14th floor was Nova Systems, which said everything about the company and nothing about the woman who had built it from a laptop and a nursing schedule and $47,000 in savings that she had guarded like oxygen. The envelope was cream-colored and thick, the kind of paper that cost money not because it needed to, but because the sender needed you to know that it had. She opened it at her desk, beside her morning coffee, while her assistant Renata held calls. Mr. Dominic James Hargrove and Miss Serena Lynn Cole request the honor of your presence. She read it twice. She set it down. She looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline, which on this particular October morning was doing the thing it did in October, catching light at an angle that made every building look like it had been placed there deliberately, which most of them had. Dominic Hargrove, her ex-husband, getting married, apparently, to a woman named Serena Cole at the Whitfield estate in Buckhead in 6 weeks. She picked up the phone and called her best friend. Kezia Odom answered on the first ring, which meant she was either at her desk or had been waiting for a reason to stop being at her desk. And with Kezia, it was usually both simultaneously. Talk, Kezia said. Dominic's getting married. A beat. When? 6 weeks. Whitfield estate. A longer beat. Then a sound that was not quite a laugh. And he invited you. Cream envelope. Hand delivered. Naomi. Kezia's voice went careful in the way it went careful when she was thinking 3 moves ahead. He didn't invite you because he's generous. I know why he invited me. Say it. Because he wants an audience. Naomi leaned back in her chair. He's been running a story about me for 3 years. The cold wife. The ambitious one who was never really present. The one who couldn't hold a marriage because she was too focused on herself. She paused. He wants me in the 3rd row watching him marry someone else. He wants the final scene where he wins and I'm sitting there being the proof of it. And you're thinking about going. I'm going. Silence. Naomi. Kezia. He doesn't know about the boys. He doesn't know about Nova. He doesn't know about the building or the Series B or the logistics contract or any of it. He stopped looking at me the moment the divorce was final because the story was set and he didn't need to update it. She was quiet for a moment. He invited a woman he thinks is quietly falling apart in East Atlanta. He's going to get something different. Kezia was quiet for long enough that Naomi could hear her thinking. How different? Kezia asked finally. I'm going to need the helicopter. Another silence. Then, Darnell's in town through November. I know, Naomi said. What Dominic Hargrove believed about Naomi Carter's current life was a story assembled from second-hand information, confirmation bias, and the particular satisfaction of a man who had ended a marriage and needed the ending to have been correct. The story was this. After the divorce, Naomi had left the marketing firm where she'd worked during their years together and started something small and unimpressive on her own. She lived in an apartment in East Atlanta, modest, appropriate for a woman who had not been able to keep the life she'd had. She moved through the city quietly, attended few events, had made no significant noise in the business community. She had not remarried. She did not appear to be thriving in the visible way that Atlanta tracked thriving. This story was wrong in nearly every particular. The truth was that Nova Systems, which Naomi had incorporated 11 days after her divorce was finalized, had closed a Series B funding round 14 months ago at a valuation of $260 million. The truth was that NOV's supply chain intelligence platform had 340 enterprise clients, a team of 52 employees, and a partnership with a regional logistics conglomerate that had been written up in 2 trade publications as one of the more significant technology integrations in the Southeast's commercial sector. The truth was that Naomi had sold the East Atlanta apartment 18 months ago and now lived in a house in Cascade Heights, with a yard large enough for 3 two-year-olds to run freely, a separate wing that functioned as a dedicated office, and a guest suite where her mother, Claudette, had been living since the boys were born, because Claudette Carter was not the kind of woman who watched her daughter do something hard alone. The triplets, Isaiah, Elias, and Marcus, were 2 years and 8 months old. They had been born on a February 14th that Naomi would remember for the rest of her life as the day the center of gravity in her entire world shifted, permanently and without apology. She had been pregnant when Dominic filed. She had found out the week before the papers arrived. By the time she processed what she was holding, the test, the result, the impossible arithmetic of it, the process was already in motion, and Dominic had already begun telling his story to enough people that entering a custody proceeding with a man who had just established a public narrative about her coldness and her failures felt like exactly the wrong kind of war to fight. She had thought about telling him for 6 weeks. She had thought about it every day. She had looked at the story he was telling and the story she would have to tell to counter it, and she had looked at what she was carrying, and she had made the decision that would define the next 3 years of her life. She would build something so solid that when the time came, no version of his story could touch it. The time had come. The 3 weeks between receiving the invitation and beginning preparations were not wasted. Naomi RSVP'd through Dominic's wedding coordinator with a politeness so clean it was impossible to object to. She noted that she would be arriving with guests. Her children, she specified, which was the full extent of the information she provided, and which the coordinator relayed to Dominic, who presumably processed with a satisfaction that imagined the children in question were a friend, S, or a niece, S, or some other unimportant configuration. He did not ask follow-up questions. She had expected this. A man running a story did not probe the parts that hadn't been written yet. She arranged the helicopter. This took 1 phone call because Darnell Harris, who ran a charter operation out of DeKalb, Petrie Airport, and whose company had a service agreement with 2 of Nova's logistics partners, had heard the context and said simply, "The Whitfield estate has a landing pad on the west lawn. The owner uses it for client arrivals." And Naomi had said, "I know." And that had been the entire logistics conversation. The suits took longer. 3 matching Navy suits for boys who were 2 years and 8 months old required a level of precision that made Naomi's enterprise software work feel casual by comparison. She brought the boys to a children's boutique in Buckhead on a Saturday morning, and a tailor, a small exact woman named Gloria, who took measurements with the seriousness of someone fitting sanders, had looked at the 3 of them lined up by the mirror and said simply, "I see what we're doing," and delivered 3 perfect suits in 10 days. Naomi's own outfit required 1 decision, made in front of her mirror on the morning of the wedding. Her mother had laid out the white dress, the structured one, the one that said arrival. Naomi had put it on. She had looked at herself in the mirror, at the woman who had built a company and raised 3 children and made 10,000 decisions in 3 years without asking anyone's permission. And she had taken off the white dress and put on the ivory column dress instead, because white was a statement and ivory was a fact, and facts were always more powerful than statements. She pinned her grandmother's diamond studs. She fastened the watch that cost more than the car she had driven during her marriage. She looked at herself in the mirror 1 more time. She was not nervous. She had examined herself for nerves, carefully, and they were not there. What was there was something cleaner and quieter. The specific calm of a person who's not going somewhere to fight, because the fight is already over, and they won. Her mother appeared in the doorway. Claudette Carter was 62 years old and had raised Naomi alone after Naomi's father died. and there was nothing in her daughter's face she could not read. "The boys are ready," Claudette said. "How do they look?" "Like themselves," Claudette said. "In better suits," Naomi smiled. It was the first time she had smiled that morning, and it was real. "Let's go," she said. The Woodfield estate sat on 4 acres in Buckhead, behind a wrought iron gate that opened onto a circular driveway with a fountain and a staff in matching vests. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Saturday in November. By 1:30, the estate was full, 300 guests distributed through the Grand Salon and its adjacent spaces. The particular hum of an event that had money behind it and knew it. Dominic Hargrove stood near the entrance of the Grand Salon at 1:42, receiving the last of the arriving guests, dressed in a suit that fit him the way suits fit men who had tailors on retainer. He was 41 years old and looked 41 in the way men looked 41 when they had money and time to spend on looking 41. Deliberate, assembled, confident. Beside him stood Derek Coleman, his best man, who had been his closest friend since college and who had, among other contributions to this day, been the one to suggest the invitation to Naomi. "You should invite her," Derek had said 2 months ago. "Let her come watch. Let her see what she walked away from." Dominic had let the inaccuracy of "walked away from" stand because correcting it would have required explaining that he was the one who had filed, and the version of events in which Naomi had somehow been the one who left was cleaner. He had said, "Send it. She are SVPD, yes," Derek said now, at 1:42, with the quiet energy of a man delivering a gift. "Good," Dominic said. "She's coming with kids, apparently." The coordinator mentioned it. "Our friends, probably." "Kezia has a daughter." Derek nodded. He looked satisfied. "3rd row," he said. "Perfect sightline to the altar." Dominic straightened his cuffs. He had constructed an image over the past 6 weeks, polished it, returned to it. Naomi in the 3rd row. The cold and ambitious ex-wife, watching him marry someone warmer, someone better suited, someone who understood what he needed. He had told himself it was about closure. He was aware, in the honest part of himself, that he rarely visited, that it was about something smaller and less dignified than closure. But he had told himself the story long enough that the two had merged. "What time is it?" he asked. 1:44, and then they both heard the helicopter. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It announced itself the way helicopters announce themselves. Low at first, the frequency of something distant, then growing, focused, unmistakable. Several guests near the west-facing windows of the salon turned. The sound was descending. Through the glass, the west lawn was visible beyond the garden, the flat expanse of it, the landing pad at its far edge that the estate's owner used for client arrivals. A black helicopter was coming down with the composed precision of something that had chosen this location and was not asking permission to be here. Dominic watched it from the entrance of the salon. His mind was doing 2 things simultaneously, registering the helicopter as a disruption to be managed, and beginning, in the slow, reluctant way of a person whose story is about to require revision, to compute. The rotors slowed. The door opened. A staff member he didn't recognize descended first and turned back to the aircraft. Then 3 small boys appeared, each handed down carefully, each set on the grass with the deliberateness of something valued. They were in matching Navy suits. They had matching faces, or close enough to matching that the slight differences were details rather than distinctions. They stood on the lawn and looked at the estate with the wide, forward-leaning attention of small children who find everything interesting and fear nothing. Then Naomi stepped out. She was wearing ivory. Her hair was up. She looked at the estate with the expression of someone returning somewhere they had already assessed and found manageable. And she bent briefly to say something to the boys, and then she walked toward the house. Derek said, beside him, in a voice that was no longer the voice of a man delivering a gift, "Those kids." Dominic said nothing. "Dominic, those kids look." "Don't finish that," Dominic said. The silence between them was the silence of two men at the edge of an arithmetic problem neither one wanted to complete. But Dominic completed it. He stood at the entrance of the Grand Salon in his tailored suit in front of his 300 guests at the wedding he had designed as a final scene in a story about winning. And he counted backward from 2 years and 8 months, and what he arrived at was a date in February 3 years ago. And what that date corresponded to was the last week of a marriage that he had ended, and the last time he had seen Naomi Carter before the papers were served. He looked at the 3 boys crossing the lawn. 3 of them, identical suits, identical faces. His mother's jaw, the jaw that ran through the Hargroves like a signature, generation to generation, unmistakable to anyone who knew the family. As Serena, he started. I don't know, Derek said. Find out, Dominic said. Go, now. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Serena Cole was in the bridal suite on the 2nd floor when she heard the helicopter. She was having her veil adjusted by her maid of honor, Jasmine, who had known her since college and who had the specific talent of being honest with Serena in the precise moment when Serena needed honesty and not before, which was a rare and valuable skill. The sound registered as background before it registered as specific, and then it became specific, and Jasmine stopped adjusting the veil. Through the west-facing window of the bridal suite, Serena watched a black helicopter settle onto the landing pad beyond the garden. She watched the door open. She watched 3 small boys in matching navy suits be set on the grass. She watched the woman in ivory step out and look at the house and walk toward it. "Who is that?" Serena said. She was not asking in the confrontational sense. She was asking in the sense of a person who needs correct information immediately. Jasmine was very still. "Jasmine, I think," Jasmine said carefully. "That's Naomi Carter." Serena looked at the 3 boys on the lawn. She had met Dominic's mother twice. She knew his mother's jaw, the strong, specific jaw that appeared in family photographs going back 3 generations. The one that Dominic's aunts pointed to with pride, saying the Hargrove jaw, as if it were a dynasty marker. She looked at 3 2-year-old boys standing in a row with that jaw, and she did the arithmetic without wanting to. She sat down on the edge of the chair behind her with the careful movement of someone managing their body very deliberately. "How old are they?" she said. Not a question. A test of information she had already half processed. Jasmine looked out the window. A pause. "About 2.5?" Serena looked at her hands. At the ring on her left hand, which had cost Dominic enough that he had mentioned the price once in a way that was not quite bragging and not quite not. She looked at the veil that Jasmine had been adjusting. She looked at the door of the bridal suite, beyond which a wedding was scheduled to begin in 16 minutes. "Derek," she said. "Serena, get Derek and tell him I need 20 minutes before we start." Her voice was controlled. The control required effort that was visible to Jasmine and probably not to anyone else. "And get me some water, please." Jasmine went. Serena sat in the chair in her wedding dress in the bridal suite of the Woodfield estate and looked at the window and thought about what it meant to have arrived at this moment with the information she now had and what she was going to do about it and in what order. She was not a woman who made decisions in disorder. She had built a successful interior design practice on the capacity to hold competing variables in mind simultaneously and find the configuration that resolved them most cleanly. She applied this now. The ceremony, she decided, was happening. She had 300 people downstairs, an address she loved, and a commitment she had made to herself, if not yet fully to the man waiting at the altar, that she was going to be the kind of woman who finished what she started. She would finish this. She would have the information she needed first. Then she would finish it. She drank the water Jasmine brought. She straightened her veil herself. She stood up. She was going to need, she understood, to have a very direct conversation with Dominic before the next 24 hours were over. But first, she was going to get married because she had decided to, And Serena Cole had never yet been deterred from a decision she had made clearly. The ceremony began 21 minutes late. No announcement was made about the delay. The officiant stood at the altar looking at his notes. The musicians played through their prepared repertoire a second time. 300 guests did what guests did when an event ran late. They adjusted, murmured, checked their phones with the subtle angle of people who didn't want to be seen checking their phones. The delay was noted by everyone. The reason was noted by no one officially. The reason, in the way that reasons traveled to a room without announcements, had moved through most of the 300 guests in the form of observation, inference, and the specific attention that a woman arriving in an ivory column dress with 3 matching toddlers attracted when she walked through a room where approximately a quarter of the guests had known the groom for more than a decade. Naomi reached the 3rd row and sat down. She settled the boys beside her with the efficiency of a mother who had attended public events with small children enough times to have developed a system. Isaiah on her left, Elias on her right, Marcus between them, which was where Marcus preferred to be. Not the middle for any particular reason, but the position with the most visibility, which suited his nature. She had brought a small bag with the essential items, 2 toy trucks, a container of the crackers that Elias required at intervals, a drawing pad with attached crayons for Isaiah, who could occupy himself indefinitely with crayons, and nothing for Marcus, because Marcus, in the way of 3rd children who were also the most observant, would find his own occupation in whatever was available in the environment. What was available in the environment, 2 seats down in the 3rd row, was Vivian Hargrove. Dominic's mother was 63 years old and had the bearing that came from decades of being the kind of woman people made room for before she asked for it. She had been given her seat, 3rd row, aisle, left side, with the particular placement of someone who was important enough to be close, but senior enough not to need the 1st row. She had arrived with the composed expectancy of a woman attending a ceremony she had approved of and dressed for. She looked at the 3 boys. The 3 boys looked back at her with the unmediated attention of small children, who had not yet learned that sustained eye contact with strangers required social justification. Marcus, in particular, looked at her. Vivian Hargrove had spent 63 years cultivating the capacity to receive information without visibly processing it in real time. She received the information that 3 small children were sitting 2 seats away from her, and she received the further information contained in their faces, and she received the most particular information of all, which was the jaw, the Hargrove jaw, which she had seen in her mother's face and her grandmother's face and her son's face, and which was now looking at her from 3 angles simultaneously. She was very still for a long moment. Then she turned to look at Naomi. Naomi met her eyes. "Hello, Vivian," she said. Her voice was quiet, as appropriate for a ceremony setting, and entirely composed. Vivian said nothing for a moment. She was assembling something, the expression of a woman finding the right language for a situation that had not been in her prepared repertoire for the day. "When were they born?" she asked. Her voice was barely above the ambient sound of the room. "February 14th, Naomi said. 2 years and 8 months ago." Vivian looked at the boys. Marcus was still looking at her with the focused, non-judgmental attention of someone conducting a thorough assessment. Isaiah had found his drawing pad and was already working. Elias had arranged himself against Naomi's arm with the practical economy of a child who identified comfort and secured it. "Does he know?" Vivian asked. "He will," Naomi said. Today, Vivian was quiet for long enough that the silence had weight. Then she reached into her purse, the structured leather clutch she carried to every formal event, and produced 3 individually wrapped candies. She held them out toward the boys with the precise, deliberate motion of a woman making a decision that she intended to hold to. "May I?" she said to Naomi. "Yes," Naomi said. Vivian gave each boy a candy. Isaiah accepted his with the distracted gratitude of someone whose primary focus was elsewhere. Elias accepted his and immediately determined the optimal storage location. Marcus accepted his and looked at it, then looked at Vivian, then looked at the candy again with the expression of someone conducting a full analysis before committing. "Thank you," Marcus said. It was the first words any of the boys had said since entering the room. Vivian pressed her lips together. She looked at the altar. She looked at her hands, which were folded in her lap. Then she said, in the voice of a woman delivering something that had been delayed but not abandoned, "He was not kind to you." It was not a question. It was something between acknowledgement and contrition, said quietly in a room full of people in the specific way that true things sometimes got said at events designed for different kinds of speech. "No," Naomi said. "He wasn't. I believe things I should have examined more carefully," Vivian said. "I know," Naomi said. "We're past it now." Vivian looked at Marcus, who was still looking at her. "He has your patience," she said. "And your son's attention," Naomi said. "He watches everything." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then something in her face settled, the specific settling of a woman who has decided where she stands on something. "After today," she said, "when things are calmer, I'd like to see them." "If you'll allow it, I'll allow it," Naomi said. The musicians shifted to the processional. The ceremony was beginning. Dominic walked to the altar with the controlled stride of a man who had been managing his expression for the past 20 minutes and was good at it. He did not look at the third row. He had decided, in the corridor outside the salon where he had stood with Derek after the helicopter landed and before anyone could find him, that the ceremony was the ceremony, and he was going to have it and deal with everything else afterward. This decision required a significant amount of the same capacity he used to conduct difficult business negotiations, and it cost him the same thing those negotiations cost him, a portion of energy he didn't fully have to spare. He stood at the altar. He looked at the white rose arch. He looked at the officiant. Serena came down the aisle on her father's arm. She was wearing her dress, the structured ivory silk ball gown she had chosen 8 months ago, and which she had tried on 7 times since, and which fit her, the way things fit when they had been chosen correctly. Her face was composed in a way that Dominic recognized as something other than happiness and something other than distress. The specific composure of a woman who has processed information and arrived at a decision and is executing the decision. She reached the altar. She stood across from him. Her eyes met his, and something passed between them, a compressed, wordless acknowledgement that they were both holding something large, and that what they were holding would need to be addressed, and that the address would happen later. He took her hands. The officiant began. The ceremony was 20 minutes long. The vows were personal, written by both of them over 3 months of Sunday evenings when the relationship had felt like the straightforward, uncomplicated thing that Dominic had needed after the marriage to Naomi, a woman who was warm where Naomi had been contained, who asked for things directly where Naomi had seemed to require him to guess, who had made him feel, in the early months, like a man who had finally found the right fit. He said his vows. His voice was steady. Serena said hers. Her voice was also steady, and also carrying something underneath the steadiness that Dominic heard and understood. The rings were exchanged. The officiant said the words. The room responded with applause. Dominic kissed his new wife with the full attention of a man who understood that this moment needed to be real, not performed, and who gave it what it required. In the third row, 2 seats from Vivian Hargrove, Naomi Carter sat with her hands folded in her lap and her son's, settled beside her and watched the ceremony with the expression of a woman who was thinking about something more complex than any one emotion. She was thinking about 3 years. About a laptop on a kitchen table at 1 in the morning while the boys slept in shifts. About the first client she had signed, 3 weeks after coming home from the NICU, in a phone call she had conducted from the parking lot of a Target because she didn't want the ambient sound of children to undermine the professional register. About the Series B meeting where the lead investor had looked across the table and said, "This is the most rigorous operations model I've seen from a company at this stage." And Naomi had said, "Thank you," and had thought, "I built this in the margins of everything else." She was thinking, "I didn't come here to watch him lose. I came here to be seen, exactly as I am." That was always enough. The church bells chimed, a sound that once promised forever. Today, they just marked time. I straightened the tiny bow ties on my 3 sons, my little army in miniature suits. Caleb, the oldest, clutched my hand, his knuckles white. Behind us, the chatter of wedding guests felt like a distant hum. My best friend Kezia squeezed my shoulder. Her eyes, full of worry, met mine. She whispered, "You're sure you're okay with this, Naomi?" I managed a smile, one that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I have to be, Kez, for them." I nodded towards my boys. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about showing them that love doesn't have to end in bitterness. That family, in all its messy, complicated forms, can still be a source of strength. Dominic, their father and my ex-husband, was getting remarried, and we were here to wish him well. The church was a sea of pastel dresses and sharp suits. We found our seats in a pew near the back. My youngest, Leo, squirmed in my lap, pointing at the stained glass windows. I whispered stories about the saints depicted in the glass, a distraction for both of us. Then, a familiar perfume wafted over. Vivian, Dominic's mother, stood beside our pew. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and something I couldn't quite decipher. "Naomi," she said, her voice softer than I'd expected. "I didn't think. I'm glad you came." She reached out and smoothed down Caleb's hair. "And you brought my handsome grandsons." My boys, usually shy, beamed at her praise. I stood up, smoothing my dress. "Of course, Vivian. We're still family." For a moment, the tension between us, a remnant of a decade of holidays and disagreements, seemed to dissolve. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the woman I once considered a second mother. The ceremony was beautiful. Dominic looked happy, truly happy, standing at the altar next to his new bride, a woman named Amara. My heart gave a strange little twist, a phantom limb aching for something long gone. But as I watched my sons watch their father, their faces filled with a simple, uncomplicated joy for him, I knew I'd made the right choice. Caleb even waved when Dominic glanced their way, a small, brave gesture that made my breath catch. During the vows, I found my gaze drifting. I thought about my own wedding day, the promises we made, the dreams we shared. It wasn't a sad memory, just distant, like a scene from a movie I'd once loved. I felt Kezia's hand find mine, a silent anchor in the emotional current. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She just understood. The past was a closed book. Today was about turning a new page. At the reception, the boys were a whirlwind of energy, chasing each other around the dance floor and sneaking cookies from the dessert table. I watched them from a quiet corner, nursing a glass of sparkling water. Kezia sat with me, her presence a comforting shield. "You're a stronger woman than I am, Naomi," she said, shaking her head in amazement. I would have been at home with a gallon of ice cream and a terrible romantic comedy. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh, this time. Believe me, the thought crossed my mind. But look at them. I gestured to my sons, now in a huddle with Vivian, who was showing them pictures on her phone. "This is better than ice cream." Vivian caught my eye from across the room and offered a small, appreciative smile. A peace offering. It was a start. It felt like rebuilding a bridge, plank by plank over troubled waters. Later, as the evening began to wind down and the boys were getting sleepy, Dominic found me. He looked a little nervous, tugging at his collar. "Naomi, can we talk for a minute?" We stepped out onto the patio, the cool night air a welcome relief from the warmth of the reception hall. For a moment, we just stood in silence, listening to the crickets and the faint sound of music from inside. "Thank you for coming," he said finally, his voice earnest. It means more than you know. To me and to Amara." I nodded. "They're your sons, Dominic. They should be here to see their father happy." He looked down at his shoes, then back at me. I know I wasn't always easy. I made a lot of mistakes. The words hung in the air between us, an acknowledgement of the years of pain we'd put behind us. "We both did," I said softly. "We were young. We didn't know how to be the people we needed to be for each other." He met my gaze, and in his eyes I saw not a stranger, but the boy I fell in love with, the man who gave me my children. "But we're doing okay now, aren't we?" he asked, a hopeful note in his voice. As parents, I thought of our shared calendars, the calls about homework and doctor's appointments, the way we worked together to make sure the boys felt loved and secure. "Yes, Dominic," I said, and the words felt true. "We're doing okay." A weight I didn't even realize I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't about forgiveness in that moment, not really. It was about acceptance. Accepting the past for what it was and recognizing the different, but still important, relationship we had now. He gestured back toward the party. "Amara really wants to get to know them better, to be a part of their lives, if you're okay with that." I looked through the glass doors and saw Amara laughing with one of her friends. She looked kind. "They need all the love they can get," I replied. "As long as she's good to them, she's good with me." A look of profound relief washed over Dominic's face. "Thank you, Naomi. Truly." He pulled me into a brief, awkward hug. It wasn't a hug between lovers, but between two people bound together by 3 little boys and a shared history. A hug that said, "We made it through." It was a new beginning, not for us as a couple, but for our expanded, complicated, beautiful family. As I gathered my sleepy boys, ready to head home, Vivian intercepted us at the door. She pressed a small velvet box into my hand. "For you," she whispered. "I should have given this to you a long time ago." Inside was a delicate gold locket. It was her mother's, a piece she had always treasured. I was speechless. "Vivian, I can't." She gently closed my fingers over the box. "You are the mother of my grandchildren. You are, and always will be, family." Tears welled in my eyes as she hugged each of the boys, kissing their foreheads. On the drive home, with my son sleeping peacefully in the back seat and the locket warm in my hand, I didn't feel sadness or regret. I felt peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, I knew that. But tonight, we hadn't just attended a wedding. We had laid the foundation for a new kind of family, one built on forgiveness, respect, and a love that had changed shape, but had never truly disappeared. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. Thank you for watching our story today. If you enjoyed it, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more content. We'll see you in the next video. What happened in the weeks after the Hargrove wedding was not simple. The first week was mostly lawyers. Hers were already prepared. She had retained them 6 months ago because she had understood that preparation was not aggression. The second week, Dominic fired his original legal team and replaced them with a different firm. The confirmation came in the third meeting. His new lead attorney introduced a position on the visitation schedule that prioritized Dominic's existing commitments. And then Dominic said, interrupting both attorneys, "That's not right. Use her schedule. The boys need consistency." The room adjusted to this. "Marcus asked about you," she said. It wasn't relevant to the legal conversation, and she said it anyway. Dominic looked up. "He asked me who the man was, at the garden table." "What did he say?" "He said okay." Something moved in Dominic's face. Not a performance of emotion. The actual thing, small and genuine. "I'll work around the boys," he said. "The schedule. Whatever they need." Vivian Hargrove called on a Tuesday morning before 9 because she was a woman who made difficult calls before she had time to reconsider them. I want to say something that I should have said at the reception, but didn't have the right words for yet. All right, Naomi said. I heard my son's story, and I believed it because believing it was easier than examining it. You didn't have all the information, Naomi said. I had enough information to ask better questions. I chose not to ask them. Vivian's voice was the voice of a woman who was not interested in the partial version of accountability. I would like to be part of those boys' lives. I understand that's a request, not a right. You gave them candy in the middle of a ceremony, Naomi said. A pause. Yes, that's the kind of thing that earns trust, Naomi said. The quiet one that cost you something. You are very direct. I have 3 two-year-olds in the company. I don't have time for indirect. I'd like to take them somewhere, Vivian said. When you're comfortable. Marcus would catalog every plant, Naomi said. I expect nothing less, Vivian said. Serena Cole called on a Saturday afternoon, 10 days after the wedding. Serena's voice was composed, in the way of a woman who had spent 10 days deciding how to approach something and had arrived at the decision. I want to say that I don't blame you, Serena said. Thank you, Naomi said. I also want to say that my marriage is going to survive this, Serena said. It doesn't seem strange, Naomi said. Dominic and I have had conversations this week that we should have had a year ago, Serena said. No, Naomi said. He's not. Neither are you. No. A brief silence, not uncomfortable. I'd like to meet the boys at some point, Serena said. I'd like that too, Naomi said. Isaiah will immediately try to show you something he's drawn. Serena was quiet for a moment. Marcus, Naomi said. Of course it was, Serena said. The birthday party was in February at the house in Cascade Heights. Naomi had strung lights in the backyard and hired a woman who did face painting and organized the kind of party that 3-year-olds actually wanted. Outdoor Spain, 18 children. The parents of those children. Kezia. Dominic came at 2 o'clock. He stood at the door for a moment when Naomi opened it. The pause of a person entering a space they had not been in before, assessing it. Come in, she said. He came in. The first 30 minutes were careful. He moved through the party with the attention of someone learning an environment, watching the boys interact. At some point in the second hour, Marcus found him. Marcus crossed the yard with his characteristic deliberate walk and stopped in front of Dominic and looked at him the way he looked at everything. Completely, without performance, from the beginning. Dominic went still. Hi, Marcus said. Hi, Marcus, Dominic said. It's my birthday, Marcus said. I know. Happy birthday? Marcus processed this. The question landed with the specific weight of a 3-year-old's question, asked without subtext, entirely literal, requiring an entirely literal answer. Dominic looked at his son. He looked at the boy who had his jaw and his mother's patience and the quality of attention that Dominic had once had. Yes, he said. I'll be at the next one. Marcus nodded, satisfied, and went back to his friends. That evening, after the guests had gone and the boys were asleep and the house was quiet, Naomi sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and looked out at the backyard. The lights were still on. The birthday decorations moved slightly in the evening air. She thought about a Wednesday morning 3 years ago when a cream envelope had arrived on her desk. The woman who had been invited to a final scene in someone else's story. She thought about the $47,000 in savings that had become a company valued at $260 million. She thought, this is what it looks like when you build the ground before you need to stand on it. Her phone buzzed. Kezia, how was it? She looked at the backyard. Better than fine, she typed back. Everything it needed to be. She put the phone down. Outside, the string lights held their warm position in the dark, patient and steady. The boys slept. The ground held. Everything was exactly where she had built it to be.